Everybody, welcome to another drive-through board game blog. Today we're going to do a top 5 list. Always around this time of year, right before Origins, and we swing into the convention season and we get new releases at Origins and then Gen Con and then Essen, and then we forget all the releases that happen the first 6 months of the year. I like, even me, and I like to do sort of a recap of everything up until now. So I do a top 5 list of the games so far in 2016. And it's always kind of interesting, and the list I kind of make up and then pare down helps as a reference, because then I'm looking at the new hotness at Gen Con or Essen, and I'm like, okay, I got to compare this now back to the early part of the year. Is this really as good as that? You know, this other game has been around for a little bit longer. Am I still playing it? So this is kind of a nice snapshot, because a lot of times things just get pushed aside, and this is a good way for at least me to remember and hopefully give a little bit of a highlight to stuff that's happened now. So we'll just jump right into it, and the number 5 is 13 Days. This is about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it's very much Twilight Struggle in about 30 minutes. Fantastic game. I've had the chance to play this some more since I reviewed it. Really have enjoyed it. You know, as you play more, you get to know the cards. You get to kind of see the cards that have gone by now, because the deck isn't too big. So as the kind of later rounds go, you go, oh, that one's already played, so I can maybe try to work around this one a little bit. And so it has that sort of those extra layers of strategy and just the knowledge that you can sort of invest in the game and learn about the game. But it doesn't take 2 hours or 2.5 hours like Twilight Struggle. Very, very excellent game. If you've ever thought you might have an inkling and an interest in sort of a historical kind of sort of war game, this is definitely one that I think everybody should give a shot to. Like I said, it doesn't take that long. The learning curve is very low. It's very simple in its mechanics. And it has a lot of good, tough decisions, though, all squeezed into that half an hour. And some nice little history and stuff involved. And I actually learned a decent amount of history about this 13 Days in the Cuban Missile Crisis through playing the game. So that was kind of a nice side effect as well. That was number 5. And number 4 is A Talon. Now, this is a very, very unique and interesting and different game, at least for me. In a lot of ways, it has kind of a throwback maybe to some games from the 70s, actually. I think it was called Starfleet Battle Stations or something like that I've not played. This was kind of, I guess, inspired possibly a little bit from that design. It's just simple space combat, ship-to-ship combat, or you can build it out and have several, squads or fleets sort of going at each other all at the same time. Really interesting thing where you actually write down on the counters themselves to track your ship stats. And that sounds like it might scare people away, but it's so simple and adds so many layers of strategy and tactics to the game of how you are treating your ships and where you're kind of spending the energy or the power in the ships without having a lot of fiddly rules and tables and all that stuff. It really condenses everything down, but I think still retains a fair good chunk of, all the kind of depth and sort of layers of theme even, all in that. And you really feel like you're flying these ships and having to deal with sort of their, the limitations almost of space in a lot of ways. So I would highly recommend it. The other thing that I would give it as far as a feather in its cap is you can play a quick little 30-minute game, throw a couple of ships out, and then just go from there. Or you can play this really interesting campaign mode and kind of track that. You can play that over several sessions where you're kind of fighting over territory and planets, and sometimes ships will be kind of off into your side deck, so to speak, and they're going through repairs, and they can come back out on the next mission, and each sort of planet will give you extra sort of credits or build points that you can use. So very, very, there's a lot of game in this box. The pieces and components are great, and the ship tiles are very thick, and then boards are nice mounted boards, and everything is really well put together. So you're going to get a ton of play out of this. And I didn't mention, so these top 4, 13 Days is great. But the top 4, like, I thought about putting Talon as number 1 there for a minute. And I was like, okay, well, yeah, this one. So the top 4 all kind of share number 1 at this point. Now we're going to kind of see, as the year goes along, which ones kind of hang out there. But Talon is really good. And I feel like, because as I kind of thought there, I was like, yes, I was going to mention that. But then I thought, I'm not really being as enthusiastic as I feel about this because it's number 4. And I was like, attacking my emotions a little bit because it's number 4, but it's awesome. Okay, so Talon's really fun. So just know that the next 3 are going to be just a gush fest. So number 3 I just reviewed, and that's a Warhammer Quest, the Silver Tower. This one really has kind of put its fangs into me in a lot of ways. Mostly I talk about in the review, mostly it's because of the theme and the way that the kind of dungeon behaves. It's this mystical kind of chaotic mage tower. You have like these portals you can walk through, and the dungeon every once in a while, or the tower, will kind of come alive and spawn stuff at you, and it will it's different little traps will happen sometimes. So the floor might sort of drop out from underneath you, or there might be some slippery area on the floor that'll make you kind of stumble and fall, and you won't be able to move again. And then you'll run into these encounters that are like you being like in this arena fighting pit, or this like pillars of beams and stuff will shoot at you, or these traps will happen. And so it has like all that crazy wackiness. And it also has the ability to really tweak and expand it, because you can buy extra figures for it, and the different heroes and stuff just act in all these different ways. So you can kind of come into it instead of just like your typical, cleric and warrior and wizard and rogue all going in and just happening to be together, and you make up whatever story you were going to say to go in there. It's always the same kind of feel as a lot of these other ones. But this one you could go in as these like dirty, seedy players. You could have a Zintek Chaos Warlord, who's usually an evil guy, with a Plague Lord and, these other guys. You just go in and try to rob this Gaunt Summoner, this evil boss that's in there. So you're going in there just trying to rob. So you can actually play the game very cutthroat. If you really wanted to, you could kind of steal treasure from each other and be very sort of backstabby if you wanted to kind of role play it up a little bit. Or you could go in as your kind of typical, celestial knights or whatever they call them, and play very altruistic and everything. So it's a very different theme, and it feels like the dungeon is very much, like I said, kind of that chaos and alive, and it's got a very cool, interesting mechanical way that you do things, where you activate dice, similar to Claustrophobia if you played that, where you activate dice to attack or move, or maybe there's special things on the board that you have to, spend dice. You're like, okay, do I spend the dice here? I really should heal a point, and then I'm going to move here, and I've got to do something about this group of bad guys there, but I've got to go shut this switch off and do this, or go do something else, or I've got this special thing that I found earlier that I've got to go and use now to succeed at the quest. So it's a very kind of Euro-y dice mechanic kind of thing going on with this very traditional, almost traditional dungeon crawl. So it's a very kind of nice alternative to your traditional dungeon crawl. It doesn't feel like a lot of the others. Okay, so that's Warhammer Quest, which I talked about for like 40 minutes in my review, so you can go watch that. Number 2 is Liberty or Death. And like I said, these top 4 could be number 1, and these top 2 was like, ooh, they're so close. Like I wanted to put Liberty or Death number 1, but I'm like, yeah, but this. So anyway, Liberty or Death is number 2. It could be number 1. Probably my favorite coin game, I think. So it's coins. I have really an infatuation with the system. Oh, you can see I didn't even do this on purpose. The Falling Sky. So I've got to get that one played as well. It's a very older, ancient times coin game, which we haven't seen yet. So free advertising. Anyway, so yeah. So I think it's my favorite. Cuba Libre is still up there. I think this one actually is probably sort of the same complexity level. So I still like Cuba Libre a lot. And I have to it's been a while since I actually played that. But anyway, back to Liberty or Death. I really like the theme of it. It's kind of my own sort of personal history because I live in the United States. So it has an immediate sort of draw for me from that aspect. It has some very interesting ways that the factions will work together and then not together. I feel like that is the best explored, at least so far, in the coin games. That sort of mutual admiration and cooperation with some of the factions with each other. So the French and the rebels and the British and the Native Americans. So there's some interesting sort of, coexistence that happens that is better fleshed out in this game. And I think there's also some more interesting tweaking to that deck of cards, because in that game you flip over a card, you have your order of operations, you do the event, or you do one of the actions or the special operations, and that's kind of it. And then the sort of the dynamics of the game comes from sort of the negotiation and positioning of what's going on and trying to set yourself up for these larger turns. Now this one has an interrupt kind of ability that sort of messes with that, and I really like that they've kind of tweaked that, because I played honestly a lot of coin games, and that's definitely a breath of fresh air, having these kind of trump cards that you can play at different points. And the French actually have to kind of play it, and you've got to sort of be mindful that they're trying to slowly build into this war, and then they kind of flip the switch and then put it into overdrive, and they're trying to do it at the right time. You're trying to kind of prevent that. So it has a very interesting kind of tactical sort of, like the map is more important maybe in this one than some of the others as well, just because some of the the lanes and ways that you can get into the cities, which are going to be worth a lot of resources and sort of points in a way, and the kind of naval aspect of it. So it doesn't really add too much complexity. I mean, it's probably not the most complex coin game, although it's up there. But it buys a lot with the changes that it does. So I think if you weren't a fan of the coin games or initially, this would probably be a stab to maybe go back into it, especially if this theme was something that intrigued you. So yeah, there's a lot to this game, and I definitely give folks they should give it a shot. Okay, so the number one is Star Wars Rebellion, and really have had a lot of fun playing this one now a few more times. Yeah, this one I think a lot of people will really get a kick out of this, because I mean, if you haven't played it, everybody's been talking about it, for a few months. But like everybody's been saying, it is Star Wars. It's Star Wars in a box. You have a lot of replayability as well, though, and that's what I found is because there's not like a ton of objectives and missions and special ability cards, so it's all kind of sort of knowable to a degree. And so after you played a bit, you can kind of know, well, he thinks he's going to get this because he's going to be able to complete this objective and score some influence points, or whatever it's called, propaganda points. And you know that now. You can see that, and you can kind of maneuver against that. And there is a metagame in this game, and that's one of the hallmarks, I think, of a game that's going to last a long time. Is it may not have a lot of variability, because there isn't really a ton of variability in the game, but the dynamics of how the players are going to play and a little bit of variability that's there is going to change things up, so that you're going to be able to kind of revisit it and play it more strategically. And the interesting thing about this game is the more you play it strategically, and the more sort of possibly the theme would devolve, and the game becomes about numbers or crunching or mechanics and strategy, the theme becomes more relevant as you do that, because it just fits the whole galactic kind of manipulation aspects of it. So I think that just, to me, just kind of locks the game in, and that's kind of where that's what kind of pushed it to the top, is everything I just said, where it's like you can explore and get into it, and the theme also like breathes back on you. This is kind of just a metaphor here, but I've often heard one musician in particular, but he sings to a crowd and he gives energy, and the band gives energy, but then he doesn't do it for any reason, this is what he says, except for to get the energy back. So if you think of like a wave sort of coming out from you, this is, in this case, you're playing Rebellion or any of these top 4 games or any of these games, and you're giving it energy, you're giving it your mental processes and your strategic thought and everything, and then the theme comes back at you from the game, and that's like the perfect sort of marriage of that, where it's like, I'm doing this because I don't want you to score 2 points, but in that way, I'm trying to send in Mon Mothma to rally these people, and I've sent, C-3PO with her or whatever, and, he's going to go help translate, and he's always kind of a good sort of diplomat, I guess. But, so there's those little instances like that that are going to happen. And yes, they're all like alternate reality Star Wars, but just that fictional hook, that sort of, that pre-knowledge that a lot of people have sort of carrying with them into the game, that certainly helps it. So that's why this one kind of just pushes it up, and I think it maybe it gets away with that a little bit, or buys off a little bit of that, because it is Star Wars, and so that's immediately recognizable. But it's like they didn't make it too noisy either. They kind of left enough gaps and things. Yeah, so that's really good. And probably somebody's going to mention the combat. But I've had discussions with a lot of my friends about this, because there's a couple of threads on BGG, and folks have said in general, you know, they think combat is the weak point. And I just kind of see their point, you know, but I don't, for me, it's not. That's all I can tell you. And I don't want to have an argument about it. You know, it's just some people don't like it. I happen to think the combat works really good. And it's, to me, this is where I come at it. So just so you can see why I think the combat is really good. I think the combat actually all happens before the combat actually happens. So it's got this kind of rock, paper, scissors things with the different colored dice. So if you fly in with X-Wings or TIE Fighters, they roll black dice. And if the other ships maybe roll red dice. And they also have a certain kind of health. So X-Wings and TIE Fighters have black health, and some of the bigger ships have the red health. Except for the Death Star, you can only kill that, obviously, with an X-Wing. So you have this sort of thing where it's like, okay, you've got this kind of fleet, and I need to counter that with this fleet. So I have the upper hand in probability of what's going to get destroyed. And then you kind of have the cards just kind of randomize that a little bit. So I feel like that's a more of a sort of a high-level view of the combat. Now, a lot of the combat in this feels like Forbidden Stars, and I will 100% agree that the combat in Forbidden Stars is way better than this. I mean, Forbidden Stars is a different game, but you can see kind of the margins. So this is, the combat's like Forbidden Stars light. You don't have quite this sort of, you know, I guess hands-on part of the combat with this as compared to Forbidden Stars. But I think that's good, because if you had like too much combat, then the game plays, you know, 3-4 hours usually. I've heard of folks taking longer, but that's usually with like their first game. So I don't know that you want the, you know, that much more intricate combat with this. So I think it works perfectly. And I think it's expandable and stuff too. But yeah, so I think Rebellion gets a slight nod over Liberty or Death, and those two maybe get a slight nod over Warhammer Quest and Talon, but they're all really kind of bunched up there. And 13 Days is obviously excellent as well. But that is my top 5 games of 2016 so far. Thanks.